Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Nutrition and Data Symposium for Food and Nutrition at the Tufts University Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Elena Martinez. I'm a PhD candidate at the Friedman School and a member of the Symposium Planning Committee. This conference was planned by a group of master's and PhD students at the Friedman School. And this is our 14th year of student-run conferences at the Friedman School focused on the future of food, nutrition, and data. We have an exciting lineup of keynote addresses, panels, technical workshops, student research presentations, and social hours for you all this week. This conference was planned by students for students, and you'll hear the voices of many students, alumni, staff, and faculty members from Tufts University and other schools and partners this week. We've also had some amazingly supportive faculty and staff members helping us make this event a reality. So before we get started with our keynote today, we'll have a welcome from Professor Elena Nimova, Chair of the Nutrition, Epidemiology, and Data Science Division and Professor at the Friedman School. So thank you for joining us, Professor Nimova. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Dear participants, welcome to Tufts University, the Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy. Welcome to the symposium planned and organized by Friedman students. The focus of this conference is on nutrition and data analytics and has a special importance for all of us. With the rapid increase of volume, velocity, variety of valuable information, our ability to turn data into actions should not be underestimated. We need to be prepared for the new challenges to address the rapidly changing demands of data-intensive tasks. This conference will create opportunities for attaining the 21st century skills to find solutions to complex problems, to communicate and effectively understand the knowledge, information, and data, to adapt rapidly to changing environments, and to build healthy, inclusive, and resilient communities. We hope this conference will pave the way to new direction in precision nutrition, to be able to offer the right solution to the right community at the right time with the right intentions and consequences. This conference offers several venues to excel, to learn about each other's perspective, and to build professional networks. These networks are expansive and include from Boston area organizations like Boston Children's Hospital and Boston Medical Center, the state organization including Capital Area Food Bank, Washington Department of Public Health, Ohio Department of Education, Montana State Department, the national governmental organizations like CDC, USDA, USAID, NIH, NIAID, Department of Defense, and US Army Research Institute of Environmental Medicine. The non-governmental organization like John Snow Incorporated, FuseNet, and Aspen Institute of Food and Society. The international organization like UNICEF and World Resources Institute. And of course, academic programs and universities from almost all the states of the United States and 40 countries worldwide. We wish to stay connected during and after the events. Friedman is known for its strong ties to alums, our core of family of Friedman. And we are all welcoming you to be part of our strong and enthusiastic community. So welcome and enjoy the conference. And now I'm passing the microphone to Andrea Strauss.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nimova. So my name is Andrea. I am delighted to be introducing our keynote speaker today, Dr. Linda Frizzell. Dr. Frizzell is a professor at the University of Minnesota School of Public Health, where she teaches both gerontology and global health. She is a national expert in the American Indian and Alaska Native health and wellness research, practice, and policy, as well as being a tribal technical advisor for healthcare and services policy and legislation for over 24 years. In 2016, she was appointed by the U.S. Secretary of Health and Human Services to the Advisory Committee on Minority Health, and she has extensive experience working with tribes across the nation in the realms of minority and multicultural health across the lifespan. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Linda Bain Frizzell.
Okay, I'm getting dialed in here. Okay, Andrea, does that show up okay?
It looks perfect, yep.
Okay, very good. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm really honored to be asked to do this presentation for you. And I'm just going to do some basics, otherwise I won't have time to get through the slides that hopefully will enhance your impression of what American Indians and Alaska Natives are and what they do. My Indian name is Wabi Gwinash. My English name is Dr. Linda Bain Frizzell. I'm Eastern Cherokee and Lakota. My clan is Bird and Eagle. I teach 6 classes that focus on American Indian health and wellness. And we also offer a Regents certificate and a minor in those courses. Now I'm going to share something with you, and I don't mean this to be shocking, but this is what the actual environment is to this day that we in Indian country meaning encompassing all Indian populations and the tribes. And so I apologize for this, but this is what we deal with. So my experience about the public's understanding about American Indians and Alaska Natives is really nothing short of being shameful. The general public has no idea about American Indians and Alaska Natives' historical trauma, discrimination, assimilation, crime and violence, oppression, and historical misinformation. I've often personally heard comments like, "Oh, what's the big deal? There are no American Indians left." Or, "Oh, do I need a medical license to practice on the reservation?" And lastly, if there's a crime committed against an American Indian or Alaska Native, the perpetrators often respond by, "Oh, what's the problem? It's only an Indian." And so it kind of hurts to share that with you, but I think you need to understand where we're coming from. So this presentation is set to, okay, just a second here. I need my slide to go down. Something's froze up here. Where's our text?
Click on your slide itself and then it should work.
Okay. Sorry. Oh, there we go. I do feel modern now. Anyhow, so what we like to start off with at the university is that we acknowledge that we are located on Dakota land. I don't know how many people are aware of how much of the Indian land was had removal of Indians taken and then sold by universities, which then became land grant universities, but it's millions of dollars. So we like to recognize that and also the vast amounts of indigenous knowledge that this land has seen, and encourage everyone to be respectful of the distinctive permanent relationship that exists between Dakota people and their traditional territories. We would also like to pay respect to our elders, both present and past, to allow us to be here today. And you can read the rest of the slide. So here's where the problem started, at least that we're aware of. When Columbus arrived in 1492 or whatever the magic date is, it was estimated there are about 10 million American Indians and Alaska Natives. By 1850, the population decreased to 250,000. In other words, 250,000, where there was 10 million before. And the primary causes for this decline is foreign diseases, starvation, extermination. And we all can, I think, relate to the foreign diseases being we have the COVID issue going on right now. The current population estimates are there's approximately 2.5 million, and the population is going to grow to 4.3 million by the year 2050. And that makes us one of the fastest growing populations in the country. Currently, there are 574 federally recognized tribes and 74 state recognized tribes. There is a real advantage to being one of the federally recognized because we have access then to deal directly with the federal government. The state recognized deal within their own state, and it's not a lot of benefit for them, to be totally honest. And these communities, to be federally recognized, the federal government has this political, I'd call it hoop jumping exercise, where tribes that have been around since Columbus arrived and there's written history, they're not federally recognized for some political reason. But historically, if you think about how Indians govern themselves, They were matriarchal, as my ancestors were, the Cherokee. Patriarchal, spiritual, warrior, inherited, and conquered. And as of 1976, tribes were forced to have a constitution, and it mirrored the current federal structure that we have now. So this federal structure that tribes are governing by is quite alien to them. So this is important to understand that each of the 574 tribes have their own constitution. So they're like little mini countries within the United States. The elections are held to elect tribal leadership, generally called the tribal council. Election governance is guided by each tribe's constitution. Some tribes prefer to elect every year, and some have staggered terms. And so you can see it's difficult, at least in my opinion, for the tribes that go through an election every year, because elections for tribal governments is just as strenuous as what our federal guidelines are. Each tribal government is responsive to their individual members. The tribal governments have a direct, now this is probably the most important slide that I have in this pack, direct government to government relationship with the federal government. American Indians, Alaska Natives, due to their relations with their tribal governments, are dealt with as a political group, not a racial group, which has huge impact on what policies and laws that we have adopted. And secondly, tribal governments are not governed by states. So on health services, we can hire and credential anyone in the United States that has a license from a state, similar to other federal programs. Some federal or some reservations across state boundaries, which are issues in having to, tribal government having to deal with various state governments, even though they don't govern. Sometimes there's collaboration opportunities which tribes choose to participate in. And lastly, some federal funding is only accessible through a state, and that's Medicaid. All of our Medicaid patients are 100% federal dollars, whereas in states, the Medicaid is matched part with state funds and part with federal funds, and the block grants are an issue. There's only one tribe that can get direct funding from Sampson. That's the Red Lake tribe, which is north of here about an hour or so, and in HRSA. So tribes may not get the direct funding, and we've tried to fix that legislatively for 25 years, and we're still trying. This is just a quick view of where the tribes are located. And you see up, I'm not at the northwest angle, which is that little blip on northern Minnesota, but I'm down where it says Leech Lake. That's where I permanently live. So you can see the concentrations around the country, not so much in the eastern part. And you know, the reasoning for that is Indians moved west as they were forced or killed to grab their land. This is probably, I built this slide, and I forgive it's not real professional, but I'm not so great at PowerPoint. But I needed our regions to understand. We have 11 federally recognized tribes in the state of Minnesota, and we've just recently gained some really good status with our president of the university and the 11 tribes, tribal councils. But if you look at the United States Constitution, directly below that, you will see a tribal constitution. If you go to the right side where it says president, straight across, there's nothing. So we go down into the tribal chairperson or the highest person. Sometimes they're called governors. Sometimes they're called principal chiefs, whatever the top person is. That is status at the same level as the president of the United States. And folks don't understand that. So that is really key. And then below tribal chairman, you have a tribal council. Sometimes they call them business committees or whatever the tribe chooses. And then further, a tribal court. We don't have the three legs like what the federal does. The council assumes the legislative branch, sorry. And so going down across on the right side, you see all the departments past the 3 required. Generally, if you note down at the bottom, generally tribes will have a chief executive officer, oftentimes a executive committee, then they have tribal boards, committees, agencies, and so on. But their structure is defined by their tribal constitution. And then below that, we have the governor of Minnesota, which has issued an executive order to respect and consult with tribes when the tribes ask. So what is the federal trust responsibility? It's stated in the U.S. Constitution, numerous treaties, which I'm not aware of any that have been kept in their as they were written, because they rather favored the people that wrote them in English, which of course at the time was difficult for translators that were American Indians to translate. There's over 800 executive orders. Generally, each president will have an executive order that defines something. Numerous court decisions, other federal laws, regulations, presidential policy directives, agency policy statements, and the course of dealing with Indians. And this is what I've been doing for about 25 years, working with legislation with our federal friends, and then hoping to change. And we have changed some laws, and I'll get to that one in about 2 seconds. So all these are branches of the federal government are acknowledged. Whenever a tribe requests a consultation, the federal government must consult. They have no choice. So it's under the pretense of affecting their population. And I wish I had time to tell stories about that, because some are kind of horrible and some of them we gained some ground. So the legal foundation is in the pre-Constitution with my relatives, the Cherokee Nation in Georgia. And then we have the U.S. Constitution. And the War Department actually administered health services for Indians back since 1849. And if you drop down one to see 1955, that was the Transfer Act. The Health and Services for American Indians is in HHS after the Transfer Act. The Snyder Act, the 1921, actually provided the legal necessity to fund from Congress appropriations. And then the real turning point started in 1975, the Indian Self-Determination Education Assistance Act, Public Law 93-638. It's often called just 638, but that's where we have in law that appropriated dollars that go to federal agencies, including the Indian Health Service, Bureau of Indian Affairs. Tribes may request to take those funds and do the services themselves, as opposed to having a federal administration. And I was honored to be appointed to rewrite the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act. It took us about 3 years to get the basis. On October 9th of 1999, we presented it to Congress, and Congress says, thank you. And we're like, never in history has there been a consensus document of the 561 or 2 tribes at that time to have consensus. Think about the history of tribes. My ancestors were nearly all killed off by the Lakota, and so on. And these histories go back hundreds and hundreds of years, but all the tribes came together in consensus to write this. And it was in hiatus for almost 10 years. We got it attached to the Affordable Care Act, and it is now permanent law. So it's been a struggle working with things like that. Also, there's various state acknowledgements, the Washington State Centennial Accord, the Oregon SB 770, a ID MOU, and then Minnesota's governor's executive orders, and many more. So the Treaty of Hopewell is what actually started this. And the court ruling ruled in favor of the Cherokee, but within that language, it was declared that we were domestic dependent nations. Now, one would think initially, oh, good, you can be a domestic dependent nation. Dependent, that word has caused us lots of problems, because basically the federal government has the right to oversee everything we do. And that has problems with that. The U.S. Constitution, if you look in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 3, authorizes Congress to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states and with Indian tribes. Then lastly, in the Constitution, the treaty clause grants the federal government exclusive authority to make treaties on behalf of the United States. So starting with the Snyder Act, it was passed in 1921. That gave the authority for Congress to appropriate funds for Indian health care. And Congress mandated expenditure of funds for the relief of distress and conservation of health for employment of physicians for Indian tribes. So that's what the Snyder Act did. It basically, they had to do that to make a pathway to receive funding. And then next we have the Indian Self-Determination Act, 638, one I referred to earlier. And that was passed in 75, and it allows tribes to enter into contracts or compacts. And the pre-application determines where a tribe can compact or contract. So there's different criteria. Every tribe has the right to contract. There's other regulations that goes with a compact, but it does allow access to federal dollars. And so the historical preference of Congress was for tribes to become self-sufficient. And that was the goal of the Nixon administration, to turn back the tide of past termination and assimilation policies. Our friend Andrew Jackson had a bill almost passed that was the Indian Removal Act. And what the intent was there is to basically rid the United States of Indians. Well, thankfully, that didn't happen. So in the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act, this particular act addresses a continuing lag of health services for Indian people. At any given time throughout history, our level of need has only been funded between 40 and 60%. And that's criminal. We've tried to negotiate with Congress, but also Congress, there's only tribes in 35 states, so you can see what the monopoly would be there for voting. But we try and we try and try. We've never been funded at 100% of healthcare need. In fact, if you check the status of American Indians, Alaskan Natives, that continues to decline yet to this day. But we use a pseudo public health model as opposed to what the general population uses in the United States. And so we have a lot of prevention services. We get federal funds for sanitation, for water, for other environmental issues, for health licensing of cafes and things like that. So we do, if we didn't have a pseudo public health model, I can't imagine how bad our health would be. But in that policy, and you can read it there in the quotes, it sets the highest possible level necessary. And we are struggling to this day. So the policy shift by Congress administration to provide health funding, there was an abrogation of federal trust and relationship. They were subjecting tribes to grants versus appropriations, discretionary and entitlement funding. And on the first, it's easy enough to understand. They're trying to get rid of, the United States is trying to get rid of their in perpetuity language that they have in the Constitution that provides health for American Indians and Alaska Natives. And then rather than providing funds like the states receive and block grants and other issues, we have to write grants. And if any of you have ever written grants, and writing them is actually the easiest part, it's administering them that becomes the issue. But a lot of time is spent in that. And actually, whenever a qualified Indian person presents at any of our clinics, they don't pay anything. They don't pay a copay, they pay nothing. But they're trying to negate that so that elders and others do have to pay. Now, if you're an American Indian person, we can only provide direct services at whatever facility is. There's only two tertiary care facilities. One's in the Navajo Nation, the other's up in Alaska. So the big part here, this third bullet, discretionary versus entitlement. If somehow, and we've tried, taking baby steps, if you will, to get to the entitlement level, then that would be 100% of need that was funded. As it is right now, it's discretionary. So every year we have to go to DC and fight for those line items that we need to provide services to our people. And then the civil rights issues associated with the federal trust relationship, we actually wrote sort of like a book. It was like a 500-page thing where we justified every angle of what the health need was for American Indians and Alaska Natives. And that was another thing we gave to Congress, and they're like, okay, thanks. And we're like, what? This is what the need is. This is documented, and you don't even fund what we have to provide services. And the last thing on this policy change, there's a misconception of gaming and tribes getting rich. That would be less than 1% of the tribes in this country. And what gaming has done is it's greatly improved the economic opportunities, and more people can stay on the reservation as opposed to having to move to a city. But we still see a huge outcropping of people. 10 years ago, there was 50% of the Indian population lived on reservations or close to them, and the other 50% lived in urban areas. Today, 20% remain in the reservation communities, 80% are in the urban areas. So it's a huge change. And as an elder, my concern is a loss of traditional values and customs. And I see that firsthand far too often. So here's a population model, just to touch back to where we are. You can see Alaska is as it should be, majority Alaska Native, Navajo Nation in the bottom. In Oklahoma, there's not boundaries like what we have in Minnesota. We actually have physical boundaries here. And my property within the boundaries of the reservation is private. There's only 2 open reservations in the country, and that is the Red Lake Nation and the Navajo. And you can see down around Nashville and South Carolina, North Carolina, and so on, a population there. But most of the population of Indian folks is west of the Mississippi. This slide I'm going to explain here in a second, but you're going to see these are the Indian Health Service regions. Now, so this is a federal leg, and you can see the Nashville area covers a lot of geographic area. Oklahoma City, you can see that. You can see Albuquerque, you can see Phoenix and Navajo, and Tucson, California, and so on. The only error I have on this slide, I'm unable to fix it, Aberdeen area is now the Great Plains area. I'm in the Bemidji area, obviously, and it remains that. So these are the federal identities for tribes in areas. So each area office is responsible for the tribes within that area. So moving on to the next slide, here is a narrative of the Indian Health Service. And be careful, because you have to understand this: I is capital, H is capitalized, and S. So Health Services is not the same as Indian Health Service. And it was established in 1955, and the 12 administrative areas, which was on the previous slide, shows there's 31 hospitals there in Indian country. They're referred to as service units, 83 health centers, and in the public sector, they're called satellite clinics, 2 school health centers, and 35 urban Indian health programs. And the health facilities are located in 34 states, and the Indian Health Service is referred to, kind of shorten things up. The Indian Health Service stands for the I, tribal stands for the T, and urban stands for the U. So their ITUs is the language we commonly use. On the tribal side, by law, it is tribes and tribal organizations, not Indian organizations, tribal organizations. In other words, a tribal organization is governed by the elected officials of that respective reservation. And the 638 law, we talked about that. Within tribes and tribal organizations, we have 15 hospitals or service units, 538 health centers or satellite clinics, and that includes 166 Alaska Native village clinics and 9 school health centers, and 10 regional youth substance abuse treatment centers. Those are scattered about. They're both IHS and tribal. It just depends on where the location is, who's taking control. And that's something we desperately need more of. In the Omnibus Reconciliation Act, the OBRA of 1993 added Tribal 638, Public Law 638, and Tribal. Title 5, that's in the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act. Urban programs were added to the list of specific programs automatically eligible for Federally Qualified Health Center, FQHC designation. We are called lookalikes, but we have to send an attestation statement to the federal government to request that. And we have to have our policy and procedures all in line. They don't check that. They in the attestation statement, it says that we do that. So then we're given a number for an FQHC. The urban programs consist of 35 nonprofit. Generally, they're all 501(c)(3)s. The programs are funded through grants and contracts under IHS and Title V of the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act. And I have to tell you, it is embarrassing. It's less than 1% that urban programs receive from the federal government. And approximately 45% of the urban Indian health programs receive Medicaid reimbursement as federally qualified health centers. And that is key. I'm on a governing board for the Minneapolis Indian Health Board, and we write grants, nonstop write grants. Well, I was a clinic director for a tribe for 10 years too, and that's all we do is write grants. So the need is there. People that are service providers and staff step up to try and make up for the unfunded levels of need that we have. So we're switching now to nutrition. I bet everybody's saying, oh, finally. But these are quotes from some folks that I've known. I'll just briefly paraphrase through them. Food and agricultural codes are an invaluable guide for tribal leaders, a way they can improve the health of their people. And remember, they're independent governments, so tribes develop their own codes and licenses, as long as they're within the boundaries or the identified area that the tribe controls. And then when an Indian country lost its ability to feed itself, they used to give us well, they still do. They're called commodities. And it's improved substantially over the last 20 years. But you get a can of lard, you get a can of chicken, a can of pork, lunch meat, which is Spam, which is actually pretty good, but vegetables, everything was canned. And so that's what they gave us because we had such poor incomes. So you can imagine switching from fresh meat to various types of four-leggeds and waterfowl and all the gatherings that you do for vegetables and fruits. Then we had everything in cans. So that was a really destructive part of our history. And so regaining that, we are restoring our health, our resilience as people, and security, and secure the stability and diversification within our own communities and local economies. The Native communities have centuries of history deeply connected to food. These are comprehensive food practices where robust Native people had established practices that ensured food harvest was kept in balance and ensured the ability to sustain growth of food was nourished. In other words, we had regulations within our own tribes to not overfish, to not overkill game, to not overuse something or cause an extinction of anything. That's one of the guides for clans. So I'm bird and eagle clan. I've talked to my healer. I kind of think chickens were indigenous, but it's like no chickens. So fine. But so I don't eat birds. Just that's my sharing. And other friends of mine, maybe they're bear clan, they wouldn't eat bear and so on. That's how they keep things in balance. So we all know, and I'm a physiologist by training, and don't get to practice that too much anymore. But, so this is probably just like automatic for everybody, but it does lead into something, especially the fat calories. And then you seldom see what the alcohol calories are, but there's issues with that caloric content with alcohol. So moving to the next slide. So historically, would people who reside in cold climates have the same diets as people living around the equator? So remember the 9-calorie fat? Up here, a lot of the food that was dried and stored was very high in fat because it took up the same space as what proteins and carbs did, but it was twice the calories. I also have experience personally of a very noted clinic in this state that talking to their endocrinologist, I had some personal issues, and she kept telling me, well, you need to go on the Mediterranean diet. And finally I said, seriously, how long have you been in the country? And secondly, have you ever been up north? And it was no to both, because what we get up here for fruits and vegetables are either canned or dried. And we certainly, if you have what appear to be fresh vegetables, they're red colors or orange colors, there's green color, and they all taste the same. So getting fresh fruit that is tasty, or at least to keep your nourishment up, is pretty difficult to do in northern Minnesota. And so historically we have wild rice, which is very nutritious. It is not the same as regular white rice. We have bulbs, and we have gatherings of other fruits, especially berry gathering that sustained us since the beginning of recorded history. So that's the big difference. And so you also, with nutrition in Native communities, there's customs that happen. For instance, there's a practice that you are taking food from the earth in whichever method there is. And so you have to thank the earth for giving up those fruits and vegetables for you to consume. And there's a relationship in planting in regards to the moon, like you plant certain food that grows below the earth at a moon sign, or a different sign for fruits that bear above the earth. There's times to hunt, and they all avoid whenever there's spawning taking place, like for fish, and from other areas that it'd be too cold to grow certain foods. And it shows that the hunting and fishing and the preservation is respectful. And that's the one element that I've never seen in the public sector. You just don't go out and pick the strawberries. You give thanks for Mother Earth for giving you those strawberries to eat. And it's very particular and intended to provide enough food for everybody in your clan. And the practice is often, I hesitate to even share these stories with you because people think that, oh, that is nothing scientific about that. Well, we've actually provided evidence that there is scientific evidence that this practice is fruitful and something that perhaps other populations should practice. So the indigenous food that's grown in Minnesota, as I suggested, you can pull bulrushes. They have bulbs at the bottom of that. They have just bucket loads of blueberries, which are quite good, wild strawberries, and then other gatherings for greens. But it may vary by tribe as well, because up north where I am, the climate in southern Minnesota is totally different. You can actually have fruit trees if you want, and there's indigenous apples that grow, but there's kind of little things. Indigenous corn is kind of like a 6-inch cob, and so on. And incidentally, I don't know if people who are on this call or on this webinar from around the world know about Indian fry bread. That's kind of the big thing. Everybody's got to have Indian fry bread. Well, historically, that's not possible because wheat was not introduced to this country until after indigenous folks were here. So it is not something that is traditional. It makes for good sales, and they've kind of coined that. But understanding that wheat is not indigenous to the United States. And so what did our ancestors do? Their daily requirements of fruits and vegetables? Well, I'm not a real fan of the pyramid slide, but that's been going on for years. I know a lot of my colleagues are not, it doesn't make much sense to us either. But there were methods that our elders taught us. And one time, as a really short sidebar, there's an extension service. And for those out of the country, it's an extension service where we have master gardeners and other specialists that help people to grow food. And so one called me up one day and said, well, I'm going to come out and visit about your garden. I said, okay, but I'm going to warn you, you're not telling my mother anything about how to grow anything. And I go, really? I go, yep, because she won't listen to you. She'll tell you to leave. And so that insensitivity that the Western way is always better, think about it a little bit. Think about our resilience and our abilities to sustain ourselves and be in existence even yet today with all the atrocities that have taken place. So next slide is on heirloom seeds. And some of these have been lost forever, and at least in Minnesota and other farming communities. I was born and raised in Southwest Iowa, lived on a farm. We used to, we grew oats and we grew beans and we grew corn. And so what we did every harvest time, we would take and remember where the really healthy growth of corn and beans and whatever was established. And we'd save that seed to plant back the following year. And this is way before they had hybrid seeds, which I'll talk about in a second. So then we were able to plant that back, and those were heirloom seeds. What's happened is we've become a country of, oh, we have to make everything better. We have to make things that you can get 10 bushels more per acre than what you could for anything else. But what is never done is they forget to access or test what the nutritional value is. And so our heirloom seeds, they provided a substantial nutrition for us to survive. And as a farm person, I was happy whenever our corn made 100 a bushel per acre. But how nutritious was it? You have to fill out a survey from the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, every 3 years. They ask everything, how many acres, how much the cost is, which is really none of their business. But anyhow, they question, it takes almost an hour to fill out the thing. Not one question about nourishment. Not one. And so I've talked to folks, I've talked to my elected folks on what the issue is here with the Farm Bill and all the things that go along with that, and no movement. So now we all plant hybrid seeds because there are no heirloom seeds routinely planted anymore because we need the bushels to come out ahead or else our farm will go into bankruptcy. So what they do is they produce these seeds. Whenever you take your crop to the market, to the elevator where the grain is dumped off, they test your seed. And if there's seed in there that you can't show proof of buying, there's a genetic marker, they can test it. If it belongs to Cargill or Monsanto or whatever, you better have proof because you do not own the seed. And as a farmer, that really irritates me. So they're taking the nourishment from my land and declaring that the seed produced from that is not mine. But that's what the law is. So be aware of that. And in Indian country, we have, since there was recorded history, 3 sisters. That's corn, squash, and beans. And those are the staples that we used to sustain ourselves. And so whenever you hear the term 3 sisters, that's what it is. And unfortunately, unless you have heirloom seeds, and some of my friends do, you don't see them in any garden centers. You have to be really careful you don't get taken advantage of to buy that. So the other thing is buying food based on nutritional value, the price, how good it looks. What about the organic foods? So even the corn that we used to raise was not like the corn that it is today. You know, the big long ears and substantial kernels clear to the tippy top of the cob. It's looks good. And whereas the traditional stuff wasn't necessarily yellow, it isn't like the spotted corn, like it's supposed to be Indian corn. No, that's not heirloom seed. And then, so knowing that heirloom seeds are pretty much gone by the side and closely guarded, I believe there's even a vault in Sweden where some of our heirloom seeds are stored for perpetuity, if you will. And then what about organic foods? I actually looked into switching my farm to organic. Very costly, and we don't have any livestock anymore, so we'd have to buy manure to fertilize the seed. But the problem I have is it costs the farmer more out of pocket, and then the consumer pays a lot more for, quote, organic foods. And I can guarantee you that the safety cautions and the inspections for organic foods does not guarantee that they are organic. So you have to be really careful. And whenever some of my friends say, well, I got some cage-free eggs. And I go, oh, really? You know where those little buggers go whenever they're turned out of the fence, don't you? They go straight to the feedlot where the cattle are, and that's where they eat. So people, oh, really? And I go, ah, that's what the truth is. So moving on, selective breeding, non-plant protein sources. Do we have hybrid buffaloes? Yes, we do. And those are buffaloes that have been bred specifically to gain weight faster so they can be marketed faster. Do we have hybrid fish? Yes, we do. Do we have hybrid waterfowl? Absolutely. Overland fowl. I don't know about reptiles. I'm not even sure about clams or oysters or other, quote, water critters. But what happens is in northern Minnesota, the fish of choice is a walleye. And so they have found that each lake, you know, are supposedly 10,000. Well, we got way more than that. But each lake has grown their own specific DNA tested strain of that fish. And so whenever they restock lakes, which they commonly do, our Department of Natural Resources, they have to genetically match the fish. The buffalo, same thing. They found a genetically correct buffalo, and they're kept separate from the other buffalo, because if they commingle, then you have that hybrid buffalo, and the meat is not true buffalo. So we actually have two sources of buffalo in this country. It's the woodland buffalo and the Great Plains buffalo. They're two entirely different genetic makeup. So remember that. And moving to the next one. So this is something that we've done in Minnesota with one of our tribes. This has happened to your viewers. If you ever have a opportunity to go to this, we had to have a virtual conference this year because of the COVID. But back in November 5th, 2015, the Shakopee Minnewacan Sioux community announced the details of a 1 million seeds project for native health gift to the University of Minnesota. There are 3 groundbreaking projects that have major contributions in the fields of nutritional science, public health, and food production. And the project included a series of annual conferences focused exclusively on American Indian nutrition and food access to be jointly convened by the university. And at these conferences, we had people from Australia, New Zealand, a couple folks from Europe. And so it's widely visited, and we all learn from each other. But it's publicly accessible. Anybody can sign up for this. And we recently are working a little bit on research relations with universities, which I'm not sure if you know, but universities and research relations, not necessarily so great, because we tend to be treated like in history like guinea pigs. Some still do. And so doing services like that does not lend a favorable opinion of universities. We're working on it, and the Shakopee folks actually came to us to help them with this conference. And then a study analyzing the obstacles between the Western academic research I just mentioned. So this is some data. I'm going to quickly go through this. You can get a copy of the PowerPoint. I kind of want to set just for the conclusion what we're talking about here. You can see the huge difference on different things related to our issues in Indian country compared to the all races. Now, unfortunately, getting accurate data for American Indians, Alaskan Natives is a huge challenge. There's only really one place we can get that, and I'm on that committee, and we're going to be releasing the document probably in another month or so. So be extremely careful whenever you read about Indian data. This is Indian Health Service data, so this would be deemed to be as accurate as any data could be. So you see the suicide issues, pneumonia. We have a huge problem with SIDS death in Indian country, and then alcohol induced. Moving on, this is a very old slide, and I'm sorry, they just don't have, I've looked and looked, they just don't have a new one I can make. But look at the difference. You go clear over to the very end. This is 2013. Look at the medical and then the other expenses of an Indian person to the federal government. The federal insurance, the Medicaid spending per enrollee, veterans, national health spending per capita, and then Medicare. I mean, this should be insulting enough to anybody in Congress. How they expect us with the limited dollars that we have to be able to provide health services. Once again, this is the newest data that's available. We have a document called Trends, and that came out in 2014. That data is always 5 years in arrears. So this is the best that we have for this. But these are the typical things. For whatever reason, tuberculosis just keeps lingering on reservations. They just can't get it so that people don't reinfect, or it somehow or other survives. Alcoholism, motor vehicle, diabetes. Actually, I think this is an undercount. And the mortality statistics, and the reason I think it's an undercount, you would very seldom die of diabetes. You would die of atherosclerosis, which is heart disease. And that's because you have too much insulin circulating in your body, which it can't use. So that really promotes atherosclerosis. Unintentional injuries and suicide at the bottom. So lastly, it's fundamentally necessary to understand that the Indian health system is like any other. We have our own laws, we have our own procedures, we have our own system to answer to the population we serve. It serves the poorest, sickest, and most remote populations in the United States. Each tribe's culture undergirds and guides their elected leadership to meet their respective unique needs in this very complex environment. Now, I told you before I was, for the folks from Tufts, I was teasing a little bit. So this is actually in Canada. I have some property up there that was appropriated to my great-grandmother. And so this is a vision out into perpetuity, wherever this ice road goes. And with that, my last slide is my contact information. And hopefully everybody can take note of this and at the very least be knowledgeable. So when everybody says, oh yeah, you know, it's just another Indian, I never hear that again. Hopefully. But one last story. I had a student several years ago. Her daughter was in 3rd grade and they were doing Heritage Week. And whenever it came to her daughter's turn to talk about her heritage, she starts saying, oh, I'm an American Indian. The teacher stops her and she says, quote, oh, no, you're not. There are no more Indians. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Frizzell. That was an incredibly enlightening address and a really good opportunity for us all to learn a lot. We do have a couple questions. I would love to take the last 5 minutes to address a few of them. Again, if anyone in the audience has more questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. But I'll start with this one. What do you think are the biggest health challenges? You mentioned diabetes and atherosclerosis, especially. What do you think are the biggest health challenges, specifically in the context of non-communicable disease, facing tribal members today? And what are the ways that they can be better addressed?
The biggest problem we have in the United States is access to even basic primary care. So the Indian Health Service is small h, small s. You have hopefully a service unit which within driving distance. On the reservation where I live, one of our satellite clinics is located 80 miles from the other furthest satellite. So access to services, we provide basic primary care. And we have an overloaded system. It used to be called contract health. Now it's called purchase and referred care. That is ration dollars that come from the appropriated dollars from Congress that we help people to get their cataracts removed, their knees repaired. That money is spent first by people who need a heart transplant, or in case of diabetes, a kidney transplant, basically life and death situation. If there's any dollars left over, which there never is, then they go to the folks who have non-urgent needs like cataracts and things like that. But access is the biggest deal.
All right. So this is pretty related to what you just mentioned, but we've all probably heard at this point that COVID-19 has hit reservations especially hard. What are your thoughts on the specific factors at play that have made Indian reservations especially vulnerable to pandemic conditions?
Well, first of all, being a public health expert, I'm more than a little irritated, and I don't want to get myself in trouble or you in trouble, but I'm more than a little irritated on the guidance that was given. And we know that in Indian communities, we have extended families. In other words, your grandmother, your aunt, uncle, I mean, close proximity. That was the issue with the Navajo Nation and the Choctaw further east. What happened is once they were infected, it just spread like wildfire, because especially on the Navajo Nation, it was recommended, quote, that they wash their hands for 20 seconds. I mean, it's like, are you serious? A Navajo person, they have to have their water trucked in and put in a cistern in each of their little places where they each house. And so that's just ridiculous. And they still recommend the washing their hands. Well, that's fine, but you know, antibacterial soap does not kill the virus. It requires at least 90% alcohol to rinse your hands to kill the virus. So the misinformation that was given out was pretty awful. But in the beginning, the administration didn't understand how to dispense the checks to begin with and other dollars for service care. And they actually went just public and did not include the Indian Health Service, which has, you know, like zillions of years in doing fund disbursement for tribes. So what happened is the Alaskan Native folks became irritated with the lower 48 because of what the federal government was doing. Well, finally, the federal government got a clue, and they or somebody from IHS said, hey, this is how you get the funds to the tribes. And so then we had monthly calls from the White House and generals and admirals and everybody, and we got it straightened out. But initially that nobody knew what the deal was. Nobody understood that an airborne virus is something that you do not take a chance with. So that was the issue in Indian country. And I teach here on the reservation for the university. It's just 4 hours from here. And in this area, we don't even have Zoom people have the ability to do that. But pretty much we stay to ourselves, and to do things with research, that's been put on hold right now because we just can't have more people contaminating or infecting our people.
Absolutely. Well, our time is just about up. Thank you so much. This has been an opener to the conference, and I hope that this will facilitate further partnerships and further communication multi-directionally. So thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm totally honored to do this. So everybody take care and stay safe and wear your masks.
Thank you so much, everyone. We'll see you for the next sessions.